the Latin word for fate. It's also the title given to a project called the Fatum project, a strange and reality-bending rabbit hole that might just leave you questioning everything you think you know about reality itself. Think about the places you go every day. Your drive to work, the stores you shop at, the places you like to hang out. How many back alleys, abandoned lots, and odd buildings do you think you've driven past without ever giving it a second thought? Somewhere near you, not far from your daily haunts, is a place that you'd never been. A place that you would never go to. A place that it would never occur to you to even think that this place existed at all. No matter what we do, no matter how random we try to be, the places we'll go are invariably influenced by our life experiences and our tendencies. These tendencies are mathematically determined. There's a limited number of logical paths your mind will follow while deciding how or where to go. There will always be a place that our brains aren't wired to choose and that our choices will never lead us to find, at least without external stimuli, such as someone leading you there. To illustrate this, you can play a game called the Chaos Game. You draw an equilateral triangle on a piece of paper, then choose any point on that paper and draw a dot. Now, using a die or a random number generator, or really just choosing at random, you draw a dot halfway between the dot you drew and one of the corners of the triangle. You then repeat this process from the new point, which is the dot you just drew. No matter where you start your dot at, you'll end up drawing the same pattern, give or take the initial dots that lead to the triangle. The pattern you draw will be something called a Sierpinski triangle. Notice when you look at this triangle that there are places where dots are repeatedly placed and spots where dots never end up. Since we've given the exercise certain rules, like draw a point halfway between this point and the other, we inevitably end up with places the dots will never fall. By providing even a few basic rules, we can turn an exercise that's intended to be entirely random into something that can only give a set amount of outcomes. We can refer to these places where the dots never fall as blind spots. Similarly to how there are places in this experiment where dots never land, there are places in the world where our lives will never lead us. Believers in the Fatum theory call these constraints on our choices, such as logic, societal norms, habits, and any other things that influence our behavior, our stasis field. The stasis field is the collective force of factors that keep us each in our perspective reality tunnel, and means that we won't ordinarily ever step outside of our areas into these blind spots. If you spontaneously decide to walk up in the woods and look for somewhere you've never been, this isn't the same as a blind spot. A blind spot is a place you would never think to go, not just a place you've never been. One that, mathematically, it's almost impossible that you would find yourself in. This essentially means that no matter what you do or what choices you make, there are places in the world you'll just never find yourself, because no chain of decisions your mind would make would ever lead you to that place. The researchers behind the Fatum theory believe that these blind spots held significance, and that breaking out of what they called your reality tunnel could have interesting effects on the world around you or lead you to places or objects of importance. So if this is true, how could a person ever find a place like this? They can't research it, they can't wander about until they find it, they probably can't even stumble across it. The only way to do this is to go somewhere independent of our cognitive biases, without thinking about it at all, somewhere truly random. For instance, by using a random number generator to generate coordinates and then traveling there. Now, using an RNG isn't guaranteed to get you to a blind spot, especially not the first time. But since it can choose anywhere on the map, odds are that given enough attempts, you would eventually find your place in one of these theoretical blind spots. They explain the experiment by saying that you should choose a relatively small search area, somewhere you're familiar with, generate coordinates, and travel to them regardless of how interesting they seem. Now, if you pick and choose places based on how convenient they are to get to, or whether or not they seem interesting, then you're bringing back in those cognitive biases and you're not really breaking out of the reality tunnel. So odds are you would never find a blind spot. Many people that were performing these experiments reported finding places within 5 minutes of their home, easy walking distance, that they never would have known existed otherwise or never would have given a second glance. The act of traveling to these random places is called randonauting, and a strange community has formed around it. The conductors of the experiment were concerned that external determinism could influence a regular RNG. What we typically think of as a random number generator is actually what's considered a pseudo-random number generator. We give a computer an algorithm and a set of numbers to choose between, and it uses certain specifications to select one of the numbers for use. But because it's a pre-written program, it's predictable and not necessarily the most reliable. They were concerned essentially that outside factors could skew the true randomness of the experiment and decided instead to use something called a quantum RNG. This is based around the fact that some aspects of quantum physics are truly random, such as the nuclear decay of atoms, and can never be really predicted. Because these things are entirely unpredictable, if the correct machines are used to read this data and turn it into numbers, a completely and truly random number can be chosen. Interestingly, as the project went on, they found that quantum RNGs are influenced by a completely separate set of factors, but we'll get into that a bit later. One aspect that the researchers were interested in about these blind spots was what the long-term effects of a researcher remaining in a blind spot for a long period of time might be. Since these are places that they believe the person was never intended to be, they hypothesized that this could have monumental impacts on the clockwork of the universe. They also believe that objects found in these blind spots could have significant effects on events that were otherwise intended to go a completely separate way. Essentially, they could profoundly change the ripples of the butterfly effect on the world. Since this object was mathematically determined to be in this place that the researcher otherwise would never have been, the researcher being in possession of such an object could cause a major shift in what the future otherwise would have looked like. This object may lead you to a place that you otherwise never would have gone, like, say, an antique store. And while there you could meet someone that you learn to love, hate, or become friends with. Going with the example of meeting and falling in love with and marrying this antique store clerk, that profoundly affects what the outcome otherwise would have been if you had never gone to a place you were never intended to go. You may have been originally slotted to marry someone else entirely. On a psychological level, the researchers also noticed certain trends in the reactions of the participants. Mainly, these trends tended towards two psychological phenomena. These are explained as the reactions that our brains have to the knowledge that we're in a blind spot, a place we were never intended to exist within. They refer to these as void meme and despair meme. Void memes are characterized by a hit of dopamine similar to what we experience when we solve a problem or complete a task. The brain reacts with excitement to this concept of unknown and uncertainty and seeks to understand and search for truth. These apparently can help the mind pick up details and small things that you otherwise wouldn't have noticed and make you generally more attentive. The despair meme is a similar but negative reaction, where a person reacts with anxiety or fear toward the concept of the unknown, and they assume dangerous or frightening things. Those that experience this report a feeling of unwelcomeness, as if they're trespassing in a place they don't belong. They say they feel the place they're in is dangerous and reality itself is looking at them with hostility. Many people who experienced the despair meme abandoned the experiment and became angry about it. These people will experience a similar effect to the void meme, where they begin to have heightened awareness of certain things, but usually these things will be taken in the context of a threat. They'll begin to notice glances from strangers or other things that they perceive as a threat to their well-being, similar to an anxiety attack or a fight or flight response. Remember earlier when I said that quantum RNGs have their own set of factors that can influence them? That plays a significant role in the evolution of the Fatum project. It started with a study on random event generators called the Global Consciousness Project. It was an attempt to detect possible interactions of global consciousness from people with physical systems. It was based on the research performed at Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, which is apparently abbreviated as PAIR, ignoring the word lab, which doesn't make a lot of sense since PEARL would be equally memorable as an acronym. But acronyms aside, PAIR performed tests on random event generators to see if people could influence the outcomes of the numbers that they created with psychokinesis. I know this sounds crazy, but apparently it actually worked. Subjects would attempt to use their mind to influence the machines to produce higher, lower, or medium numbers, and somehow the data overwhelmingly showed that this was possible. The intention of the test subjects significantly and profoundly affected the numbers produced when compared to averages from experiments where no attempts were made to influence the outcome. Another study which was influential to the participants of the Fatum project was performed by Jacob Jolij at the University of Groningen, and I'm probably saying that completely wrong. It asked people to look over numbers generated by pseudo-RNGs and those produced by quantum RNGs without knowing where the numbers came from, and simply say if the numbers meant anything to them. The results showed that people found meaning in the numbers from quantum RNGs significantly more than they did from pseudo-RNGs. These experiments would both seem to suggest that quantum RNGs can be subtly influenced by the minds of observers. Assuming that a person's thoughts can influence a quantum RNG in a way that's meaningful to them, the researchers of the Fatum theory developed another experiment similar to the previous randonauting. In the same way to searching for blank spots, quantum RNG is used to generate a point on a map. The QRNG generate thousands of points at random, and similarly to the chaos experiment, these points will tend to cluster in certain places and entirely avoid others. Assuming that the mind is able to alter the randomness in favor of a meaningful number, it was hypothesized that it could possibly also lead researchers to a meaningful place. These places where the dots tended to cluster together were called attractor points, and places where they tended to entirely avoid were referred to as voids. These two phenomena together were referred to as IDAs, which stands for intention-driven anomalies. The theoretical force of the person's mind on altering the outcome was referred to as the genesis field. This new line of research, IDAs, was very different from blind spot research. It's theoretically possible to encounter a blind spot while generating IDAs, but that wasn't the goal. Since the position is formed or influenced by your mind, it's actually more likely to be the opposite, leading you somewhere meaningful or related to something you're thinking about. It was at first thought that these places could contain artifacts that could hold significant probability anomalies, or trigger significant cascades of events and consequences. However, as the experiments went on, researchers reported finding images or objects related to what they were thinking about during or before the experiment. The majority of reports included meaningful coincidences, such as encountering something on the way to or at the point of the IDA that was related either directly or tangentially to the thing they were thinking about. They interpreted this data as meaning that the IDA didn't necessarily show the location of the anomalous object or image, which they referred to as an artifact, but instead possibly providing the conditions to find it. For instance, it may lead them across the path of the artifact on the way to the IDA point. Artifacts of note have included objects, images, and graffiti that were found along the way to or at the IDA point. This seemed to be somewhat linked to what the researchers had in mind when they performed the project, or something that one of them admitted to thinking about. One interesting thing that they've noticed is that a lot of the time they'll find graffiti which seems to be talking directly to them or referring to what they're doing. They refer to this as the talking walls phenomenon, which is just a really creepy name to give it. One interesting example was a researcher who looked at a map of London before conducting the experiment, and found a map of the London Underground when he arrived at the attractor point. You may think that this isn't so odd, since maps are regularly posted in public areas, but the man was in Australia. Many people also report encountering the number 333. Interestingly, it seems that the numbers cannot just be influenced by the thoughts of the person conducting the experiment, but by thoughts of others around them as well. The admin of the website used to conduct these experiments conducted an experiment of his own by placing an object on top of the server without telling people and measuring the trends of what they found over the following 2 weeks. The object he placed on top of the server was an owl figurine, and he noticed a significant spike in people who found owl figurines either on the way to the IDA or at the IDA point. He tried this experiment again a bit later with a piece of meteorite, and 4 different people at least reported supposed sightings of aliens or UFOs. It's been found that results can often be achieved more easily by stringing anomalies together, not unlike the chaos game. Going to the site of the first anomaly, then generating another with this as the starting point and traveling to that one. It's been found that anomalous results are most often discovered on the 3rd attempt. People in the Randonauts community now firmly believe that by aligning their intentions before generating the number, they'll be led to a significant place or object based on what they were expecting or thinking about. Some examples of this on the subreddit include this location when looking for a magical place that would inspire creativity, this location when searching for something unexplainable, and this location when searching for happiness. This last person was thinking of good vibes and happiness, and they found these balloons with their own name written on them. So what does this all mean? Is any of it true? Without looking into it myself, it's hard to say. Many people believe the Fatum project to be nothing more than confirmation bias, and the Randonauts themselves admit that their theory does need more blind testing, where people would be told that they were going to IDAs when really they were just sent to regular locations to see if they noticed anomalous things or not. However, I think there's a lot of interesting data and experimentation going on here, which is why in my next video I'm going to try it for myself, giving it a shot at finding blank spots as well as voids and attractor points. So if you're interested in seeing the results, be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching.
Suspect something isn't right. Their shifting eyes betray their smiles. All the while the sirens singing.